Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore Presents with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. This month we are talking to Daniel Clarke, who's a Cape Town-based artist who also works in animation, film and illustration. He actually started animating way back in 2008, but he's also worked with all kinds of different companies, including the BBC and Disney. Now, the reason why I'm speaking to him is to talk about Kariba, the graphic novel that he's created, which explores a myth from Zimbabwe. So we're going to be talking about how you actually adapt stories for visual storytelling formats, whether there's actually any possibility of ever having a global mythology and why that might not be the best idea, and also where stories might even come from in the first place. So I hope you enjoy this, and I'll see you soon. So hello and welcome to Fabulous Folklore.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. So obviously I've got you here to talk about your graphic novel Kariba, and why don't you actually tell everybody about that, and also what made you choose that particular story to tell?
Sure. So how do I briefly sum it up? It was a graphic novel that I made through Kickstarter. The inspiration for the story, my mother, obviously my grandfather and mother were from Zimbabwe, and I was looking for a story. I'd been working in the animation industry for a while at that point, and kind of frustrated with the sorts of stories that were being told. And I went for a walk one day, lay on a rock on Table Mountain, and remembered those stories that my mother had told me about. And I'm not going to say the whole story came to be fully formed, but a good chunk of like, oh wow, this could be something cool. I have a connection to it, and it's just fertile soil to grow something interesting. So it's based on this mythology of a river spirit or river god in the Zambezi River, the Zimbabwe, which at the time when the book is set was Rhodesia.
Cool. So would you say then that, because obviously it's about like the building of a dam and so on as well, and also the impact that has, it's got quite a strong ecological message. So was that something that you always wanted to put in there, or was that just something that kind of fell out of the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah, I'd definitely say the latter probably, because I mean it's interesting you say that, because I made the book with my brother James Clarke. He did the writing. We came up with a story together, but he wrote the dialogue and stuff. And I don't think that was ever part of the discussion to make an to have any message actually in the story. I think that's a philosophy that I still subscribe to, is that ask interesting questions. Don't try to answer them necessarily in a story. And I think what we were trying to do was just sort of imagine a conflict and imagine as best we could being in both sides, and tell the story from both sides, and just see how it plays out. Obviously, it had massive ecological effects to flood such a massive swathe of land. Also for the people who lived there, the Tonga people, I think there were about just over 50,000 people who had to move from their home, which is, they've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. This was where they lived. This is where they were connected to the land. This is where their ancestors were. So this was a huge tragedy, really, for them. But then on the other hand, this is a dam. This is offering electricity to schools and hospitals, and you can, increase the quality of life in the cities. So I don't think there's no moral simplicity to this. I mean, things can be both good and bad at the same time.
Yeah. Sorry, there's just a fly in here that's really annoying us. This is the joy of doing interviews. So would you say then that, because you sort of said that the story was kind of the primary sort of focus, what kind of problems do you have when you then try to turn a story into like a visual form of storytelling compared to just simply sort of writing one as prose? Like, what kind of process do you follow to essentially come up with a graphic novel?
I can only speak from my experience, because I've never written a book And this is the only graphic novel I've done also, so I don't really have an approach. My brother and I spent, roughly speaking, about a year coming up with and writing the story, and then I spent another year drawing the pictures. There was a lot of overlap. I was kind of being chased by the story. I was already starting to draw and finish pages when we hadn't actually come up with an ending or finished the book. But our process, I guess, we kind of we did a lot of research. The university library here was a lot of help because it's a relatively obscure topic. There isn't much mainstream information on it. So we tried to understand as best we could who the Tonga were, what they believed, what the English, the colonials wanted, what happened. Obviously, a lot of this was written, a lot of the research we did was written either around the time or quite soon after the time. So you have to kind of read it with a lens, But yeah, we went on a research trip. We spoke to people in the area. We went onto the dam, onto the river. And then we kind of just sat and talked. Argued with each other a lot about what we thought was important or wasn't, and the stuff that we agreed on was the stuff that was left behind. And a lot of it is kind of just staying open, waiting for inspiration to kind of find you, hoping, and kind of trying to get to know the characters to figure out what they want to be, what they want to do. I don't know, it seemed to me it's a very messy, difficult process, full of self-doubt and all the negative emotions that come with any sort of creative, I think if you're doing it right, any sort of creative endeavor. So I can't, there's no clean process really. It's just be open and spend the time there at the desk waiting.
Is that the same approach that you use for animation as well, or does animation have a completely different sort of problem involved in it, where you're then having to think about the pictures through time as well as just sort of in 2 dimensions?
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because I suppose the difference there's a lot of overlap, there's a lot of similarities. It's a visual medium, but then there's also a lot of differences in just the art. Like, you decide the timing in animation. The viewer can't slow it down in their heads. Whereas a graphic novel, you can develop a rhythm and sort of pace by how you lay out the panels, but the viewer really can take it in at their own pace, as fast or as slow as they want. But animation generally is a much more commercial and expensive medium. So to create, the budgets of some of those Hollywood films are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. A normal Sony Pictures animation budget is, I think, around $80 to $90 million. The Pixar ones are hundreds of millions of dollars. So I don't know how much they're waiting around, chatting on couches for a year. I think there's, well, I do know because I work in the industry. They don't. We don't. It's on a deadline. But I think artistically, I just finished directing a film, and my co-director and I think we did have the same approach in that there's certain realities you have to deliver, but we didn't. The similarity is that we felt like it was the story kind of existed outside of us, and we needed to form the right shape within us to let it come through. That's fundamentally the same. I think storytelling. It's I'm trying to think of words that aren't sort of overly esoteric or anything, but essentially you're channeling something, and yeah, something is moving through you. And if you try to control it too much or turn it into something that you desire it to be too much, I think it kind of destroys it. It's inevitably some of that, but it's a lot of like trying to get yourself out of the way sort of thing.
So do you think because of that sort of sense of almost dealing with something that's bigger than you, does that make sort of visual storytelling in particular better suited for stories like mythology and folklore, or do you think that folklore will just find its way out in any format?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I mean, look, I think it will find its way out in any format. I think, stories around a campfire, cook fire, whatever people in the past did. Like without pictures, with pictures, they're gonna happen. We're gonna the world is meaningful to us, and we're gonna try to make sense of it. But yeah, I mean, if you look at temples and buildings and caves and everything from our past, it has pictures, it has illustrations of our experiences, of our gods, of our things that have happened to us. It's actually we have a glut of images now on Instagram and Twitter and everything, but so little of it like actually means anything to us. We probably have more images, but not on our buildings, not on our houses, nothing that actually like really tells the stories of our past and our present and mean anything to us. I always imagine like walking into a like medieval cathedral, if I lived in that period, like what that experience would be like. Like, we've seen all the cathedrals and stuff on documentaries and stuff now. I mean, it's still an amazing experience, but imagine being like a peasant who really like has no experience of, he hasn't seen statues or grand paintings or, maybe seen some scribbles, some pornography scrawled on the side of a barn. But when he goes to the cathedral, like that must just be like being transported to another world. It must just be something else. I wish I could experience that, but I don't think we can now. We're sort of we've been made numb to that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I suppose things like AI aren't exactly going to help, because then you're not even creating an image from scratch. You're just creating an image from lots of other images.
Yeah, and then it's I think the hand that made the image, it means something to us, knowing that if you look at a Michelangelo sculpture, if you knew that an AI had made that and like 3D printed it, it just wouldn't mean the same thing. It wouldn't touch your soul. It might be titillating in some way and fun, but I think that's knowing that it's a person, that somebody was trying to do something, trying to communicate something, and we're trying to understand it. Like I think there's something about that just can't be replicated. Yeah, and AI, I think, is just going to flood everything with noise. Beautiful, glistening, bright, sparkling noise.
Yeah, noise with like too many fingers. I think the thing that I'm most fascinated by with AI is to what extent is it going to just eventually, like, all the novelty will wear off and then people will just use it a bit like a tool, and then it'll just become part of someone's workflow, or to what extent will people try to use it to create the end result, I suppose, is where you kind of wonder, where is that dividing line going to be? And also, did these people not watch The Matrix at any point?
Have you read no sci-fi?
Well, this is the thing. It's like, well, obviously, I don't want to go too much off down AI because that's a rant nobody needs. But obviously, when you think of it in terms of folklore, obviously in storytelling and so on, like the stories have been telling us for a while, like this is not going to end well, and everyone's just gone, meh, I want to be able to make art, and I don't want to learn to draw. And it's kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't know how I feel. I think anybody who claims to know exactly how they feel about it or what they think is going to happen is inevitably wrong, because it's just too complex. But I mean, I have feelings about it. I'm scared by it. So it doesn't feel good. But I don't know how much of that is because I see it as a threat and I don't understand it, or because it truly is something that, not all change is good. I think there's this strange modern idea that any technological development will just necessarily lead to better things, better. Maybe, and even if it does, I still think that we have to acknowledge that we are losing something. That even if it does in some ways improve things, there are still things that we are losing, that are dying, that we will not get back. Like I've heard a lot of people talk about using AI to teach, and that it could really help developing countries who have a real teacher problem, and it can actually teach at a much higher level, and more people can access education. So, and it's hard to say that that's bad. That sounds great, but then we're losing a human teaching another human something. I feel like that's a real loss. I'm not going to say that we shouldn't educate, develop kids in developing countries with AI if the teachers are terrible, but still, I think AI marks there's something dying, something will be given up, something old will be given up.
I think that's what it's quite interesting to sort of see how we've kind of had these two things of the development of AI on one hand, and then like over the last 7 years, maybe there's been this huge boom of interest in things like folklore, which is very much looking backwards. So, and obviously you said yourself you were inspired by kind of stories sort of told in the family. So do you think that humans will always kind of have that desire to connect with older stuff, or is it always going to be, ooh, shiny new thing, and getting distracted by technology, do you think?
I kind of get the sense, you just said that there's been this sort of renewed, or this new interest in folklore and stuff. Where, because I feel like you're right, but I'm wondering, like, where is that reflected? Do you mean in like Marvel movies, like Thor and stuff, or like where is that actually? Where are we seeing that?
I would say more in terms of publishing, because when I'm thinking of the number of like books that have come out, like either retellings of Greek myths and actual books about folklore, and I suppose even things like particular hashtags on Twitter and so on, I think people have suddenly gone, oh, that thing I was interested in has a name.
That's interesting. I didn't know that, really. That's kind of encouraging to know that. Well, I guess it depends if people want to just use it. But I mean, I think that, yeah, I suppose maybe it is. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but just to that point of people are being attracted to it. Maybe people are sensing that there is something meaningful there, and that we are losing it, or that our modern lives are missing something. They're missing something important. I think it's hard, in a sort of, in like a globalized society, to have mythology or folklore, because it changes. Obviously, like these things, these gods get handed over from people to people, and they change in the hands of new people. But it's normally happened over a long, protracted periods where natural, gradual changes have been allowed to happen. And, different peoples have lived in different contexts, but they've needed to understand things differently. So the mythology accommodates that. But how do we have a mythology or folklore in a global society without it just being a curiosity of like, almost like an anthropological curiosity of, oh, that culture, they believe in these fun things. Maybe we can turn that into a show or something, like an aesthetic. Like how do we, because I imagine that mythology is an attempt for us to understand who we are and our place in the world and what the world is. And I think we're very far removed from the old mythologies. It seems like the new mythology is like some sort of scientific reductionism, like with enough science, we will find salvation. Just trust science. And scientists, and I have nothing against science. I love science. I love scientists. It's just it's become so dominant. I feel like people don't even realize that they're thinking in a modern reductionist way. Like I don't even like if you ask somebody, there seems to be so many assumptions. Like if you ask somebody, even just why they would do something good as opposed to something evil, like a modern person, it's going to give you, it's going to be kind of hard pressed to actually explain, other than like some sort of reciprocal morality and evolutionary sort of like impulses and those sort of things, which seem very anemic to me. Like, I'm sure there's lots of truth to that, but you know, why you love your child or your spouse, oh, because of this biological stuff, that it's like, that doesn't seem very satisfying. You know? It doesn't seem like a real story. Whereas mythology, I think, because of it wasn't literal. I don't even think that people thousands of years ago took it literally. I think they believed that it was real and they lived in it. But I think that it was a much more powerful way of communicating meaning than this modern stuff. I think we're kind of, yeah. I'm sounding really pessimistic.
Well, it was quite interesting that you mentioned Marvel there, because I was just thinking, is it the case perhaps that, like in the absence of, you know, kind of like a global mythology, we've kind of created one anyway, or rather one is being presented to us. That obviously I think people don't take literally again, or hopefully. I dare say there are some who do. And I mean, when you consider the amount of money that people spend on things like Disney Plus and, you know, worshipping at the altar of Disney, you know, but then when you look at the storytelling in those, because they follow such a formula, is there any space for like the nuance and so on that you get in much older myths where gods aren't wholly good and they're not wholly bad? Have we perhaps, when you're saying about sort of scientific reductionism, have we kind of as a society just moved towards reductionism, that everything's always got to be one thing or the other, but nothing's ever both and?
Yeah, Jesus, that is like the question. Yeah, I mean, the Marvel movies I think that their existence and their interest in them, similar to what you're talking about with the interest in folklore, is definitely signaling something. It's, you know, for most of Western society, God has been dead for quite a long time, you know. I think the quote was, God is dead and there's not enough water in the world to wash our hands of the blood, or something like that. That's actually the whole quote. But I agree that they're kind of replacing a mythology with a very morally simplistic modern, and they are modern. They're not new. The morals. I mean, Disney especially is very concerned about being modern, about having the cutting edge, latest values. You know, which, I mean, I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think it's more a case of what I was saying earlier about it's sort of like they're using the aesthetic elements of mythology, but really just telling simple morality plays, modern morality plays. But they feel that the scale of them, the epicness of them, I think feels like mythology, and I think that is something that we really are attracted to. Morality played out on a grand scale, you know, acted out. But yeah, I agree. Like, they don't seem to have the complex. You know, there was something about. Also want to say I'm no expert of mythology or folklore or anything. I don't, you know, but there's something about. I'm actually reading a book of Russian fairy tales now, and the morality is like there's definitely always a moral element to the story, but it's also often very unfair. Like, it's not like everybody who does the right thing gets exactly what they deserve. I mean, it's sometimes the case, but it's harsh. People die, good characters are bad, you know, it's And I think with mythology, like Greek mythology, they did say that, to me, there's something rung true about the capriciousness of gods, that, we kind of were at their whim, like, which feels much more like life. Like you can make sacrifices and pray and hope, and maybe the fates will be on your side, and that will help them be on your side. But there's no guarantees. Somebody else might make a better offering. There does seem to be something true and complex about that, which I don't really see reflected in mass media. Maybe in smaller forms or books or things. I don't know. But once again, it's like we're trying to construct a morality for the whole world, for everybody in it, which I don't think that's ever been done before. It's always been a people and their gods and their mythology, and even if it does change, it's always them. How do you make one for the whole world? It's kind of feels like you're gonna have the average of everything and end up with nothing.
Yeah, it also feels a little bit odd that you're essentially doing it also for a different motivation, because I guess, there will be a degree of earlier civilizations will have had mythologies, like, I don't want to say to control the populace, but kind of to provide like a sense of order. Whereas when you created one purely to like sell toys and lunchboxes, yeah, it kind of feels a bit weird.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, that's a good point. I think the meaning or the intention behind things is very important. And if it is purely commercial, then the outcomes are probably going to reflect that in some way. Like it's a veneer of mythology and morality, and it's not really strong. I don't know if it'll really, whereas those older actual mythology, like you said, I mean, I don't think control is always bad. If you have a mythology with a certain ethic in it that encourages people to behave a certain way, that's actually good, that's always been how we decide to do the right thing. It's not like we just draw it out of the ether. It's like we need a network of stories and meaning to help guide us. And also those stories, I imagine, would have developed over a long period of time, and the bits that didn't really hold meaning or were useful sort of faded away, and what was left was this really sort of hyperlinked, powerful story. Whereas these new ones are just sort of sucked out of the thumb of Hollywood writers with drawing on bits of random other older things, but they just can't really have the same cultural weight. It's more like going to the Colosseum, to watch people fight or something.
So it's also quite interesting as well, sort of bearing all that in mind, because obviously by contrast, sort of Kariba is very much in sort of rooted in place and a particular period in time, and and is very much focused on a combination of sort of like the mythic, but also like how it affects people as well. So do you think that something like the more independent sort of publishing and so on is like a good place for that to kind of still be continuing for people who are interested in it?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, that's normally where the most interesting stuff happens everywhere, right? And like somebody, it's often the really interesting things are impossible to pitch to like a big corporation or studio because it'll probably be fresh, and new things are terrifying, because how do we market this? How do we sell this? We can't say it's like this, so we can kind of project its success like this other thing. So yeah, definitely independent film, independent comic books, independent, anything. That's where the weirdos gather and creates culture, and then that gets stolen by the big studios and then repackaged in a nice sort of saccharine way. And
Well, yeah, I was just thinking that. I mean, when you look at sort of how for the longest time all of the Disney films were like the European sort of fairy tales, and then they started sort of diversifying and looking to other places. But you do then sort of think, well, where did those stories come from? Who was involved in those productions? And is there an independent sort of current under that, which would have also been interesting to see adapted?
Yeah, who's behind the new ones, the new Disney more yeah. I get the feeling with companies like Disney that they're following trends. They see that's the way the wind is blowing. They're getting enough criticism for like, oh, why there's only white European things, and they're like, well, we can see that this is going to be a problem, so let's have a meeting and hire some consultants. And I'm sure there are plenty of great people at Disney who really believe in it, in what they're doing, but I don't know. I just don't trust any corporation like whose motive is profit. I don't, even if on outwardly it looks like they're doing something good, and showing other people's cultures seems like a good thing, and it might actually be, but I don't really buy it if the motivation is something true. I think they just think it's expedient. But also just the way they show, like, I don't know, if I watch Moana, it has a whole bunch of elements from I can't remember exactly what the culture was, but it's the oceanic Maori sort of, like, it looks like that stuff, but the people seem exactly like modern people to me, like modern Americans. I don't, there's nothing, I don't find anything really interesting in their takes, on their diverse takes. It just seems like it looks different, and maybe some of the design and maybe they've incorporated a few cultural behavioral things that they've observed, but I don't really get the sense that it seems like same but different. I don't know. They still seem so modern to me. They still, the teenage girl is exactly the same teenage girl in every latest Disney film. Nobody gets me. I have some special power. I want. There's always an I want song, at the, I can't remember what stage of the film, where it's, Tangled or Moana or Frozen, same point of the film, they sing that I want song, and they're basically the same person. They're like quirky, people don't quite get them, they're adventurous, but they're a girl, so they're being put down. So I don't know, it all just seems like formula to me. Even people who don't realize that they're repeating a formula are repeating the formula. I think my favorite animated films are Hayao Miyazaki from Studio Ghibli. Like, I always find his films have a moral complexity that actually reminds me of life. The characters are not American characters. You don't instantly understand what they're going to do or who they are. You actually have to watch, and they're complex, and they're not easy to understand, and the situations they're in are morally gray, but they're still trying to do the right thing. But like us, like actual people, it's not always clear exactly what the right thing is. I find that's fresh and interesting to me. But I don't know, Disney. I just made a film for Disney, so I should stop shit talking them. They do plenty of amazing things, but I think fundamentally they have fallen into a sort of self-imitation kind of a rut.
I suppose all companies are going to get to a point where they almost get too big, and then it's, how do you then sustain yourself? I mean, empires do that, so
yep. And you become more and more risk averse. It's like, well, that thing made us $1 billion, and we have these overheads, and we need to make another $1 billion this quarter. So what are we going to choose? This story, which I don't quite get, and has these weird characters and very culturally specific things, or whatever, or this one that kind of looks different, and we can kind of tick all those boxes, but it's essentially the same thing. It's got the funny animal sidekick. It's got the the whatever characters in vogue right now, whether it's a teenage boy in the 90s or girl now, or yeah, I think we'll go with that one. I guess it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. So obviously, like, we've been talking about folklore and mythology and like culturally specific contexts and so on. And obviously it has been quite cool for me to sort of have people like Helen Inde from the Mythological Africans Twitter community on before, sort of talking about folklore from beyond the Eurocentric view of it. But obviously there is kind of a bit of an elephant in the room in that how easy is it for you to engage with African legends? Because you're obviously from an African country, but I'm going to go ahead and guess that your ancestors way back when weren't. How do you find that basically, because you're still in the same place, you can still connect with the storytelling through physically being there? Or is it sort of the passing on of the stories and so on? Like, how does all that work for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of both of those. Everybody's ancestors are from somewhere.
Mm.
Even in South Africa, I'm from Cape Town, and it was originally sort of two tribes, the Khoi and the San, and the Bantu people, who the essentially black South Africans weren't here, until a couple of 100 years ago. So I do think that if you are from a people and you have been grown up being told these stories, and the stories are of the place that you live and your land, you will have a deeper connection to those stories than I can have. I don't think that I can just step in and connect to them in the same way. That's, but I think that there is something universal about mythology, something powerful that everybody can connect to. But yeah, I don't claim to have. It was interesting traveling to Zimbabwe because we asked a lot of people about the Nyaminyami story, and everybody, obviously we asked local people, like that's what we wanted to. And most of the time they just told us the tourist version of the thing. If you read Wikipedia, like that was what they'd say. And we'd ask, like, what about, like, did your grandparents tell you about this? Or most of them are like, no, I mean, we kind of knew about it, but they work in those areas, so they know the tourist version of the story. So not many people actually had that much of a connection, unless you go to specific Tonga tribes. Even they, like, everybody has a kind of different, because these are oral traditions. Everybody has a different version of the story. The god's name is even different. Like the Nyaminyami wasn't even a Tonga word, actually. It's not their word for the god. So we kind of felt that in some ways that gave us a little bit of consent to just add our version of the story. Obviously, we're not claiming at all that it's the definitive version. I mean, my brother wrote a piece at the end of the book kind of with disclaimers saying this is fantasy. We're using the mythology as soil to grow our own story. And hopefully it inspires people. And everybody we spoke to in Zimbabwe was just happy that their country and some of their history was being put into something that other people would see. There didn't seem to be any ill will or negative feelings about who was telling the story, or because I think our intentions were good. We weren't trying to steal it or misrepresent it or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Like, if you are from the place where the myths are and you've been told the myths and etc., that you're definitely going to have a deeper connection to them. Although I think even nowadays, a lot of people, they just grow up in a modern way, and the myths and stories are just myths and stories to them, even if they're from that place. It's like we're in such a global, westernized sort of a society. Like, I don't know how many people actually live in those stories, believing them to be the way the world is, and how that it is just some of the stories my grandparents told me. But mostly people in Africa are Christian now.
Yeah, I think it's quite funny as well, because obviously, I don't know if you've ever read, I want to say it's Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, but she talks about the idea of, how like ideas just kind of like potter about doing their own thing, like looking for the person to tell them. And you sort of feel like if there's nobody receptive, then I guess they're just going to kind of, in that sense, latch on to the first person who's.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's a great idea. That there's this sort of, that they have some sort of like agency behind them. Yeah, I think that's yeah, I was just the only person at that point in time who happened to have the door open.
Yeah,
yeah.
could well be. So which other legends do you think you would like to adapt next?
I don't know actually. I think I would have, once again, I just will remain open and see what, you know, if something comes up. There is a lot of, especially nowadays, politics more than when I started the book around. That's the questions you ask, who tells what stories. So I'm a little hesitant now. It's a strange position to be in as like a white South African. Like I feel like a South African. That's all I've known. I'm an African as far as I'm concerned, but I definitely don't, you know, I'm not from a tribe here. I don't have any, you know, connection I have that sort of pseudo Western, my grandparents are from, well, great grandparents from Scotland and, you know, Europe essentially. But I don't have any real connection to Europe either. So I'm not sure whose mythology I'm allowed to tell or not, you know. So I'll wait for something to feel like it needs to be told and then see if that's possible. But I'm not like actively looking. I'm kind of developing a story now that's drawing from mythology, but none of them in particular, just the stuff that's managed to saturate my mind and that will come through, you know.
Yeah, makes sense. So last question, how can people find you online and engage with your work?
My Instagram handle is my name, Daniel Clarke, and then art, A-R-T. And that's my website is danielclarkeart.com. And it's basically Instagram and my website. I don't really do any other. I'm on ArtStation, I guess. That's the big sort of concept art website. But my website and Instagram will be the main ones.
I'll put the links in the show notes as well, rather than people having to sort of sit there and feverishly try and look things up and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
if you can just click a link and follow it.
I guess I have to be on Threads now too. Oh.
Have you tried that yet?
It's on Instagram. It's so easy. You just port over. So yeah, I'm on it. But I'm like, do I have to do another? I hate social media. So, but it's really useful. I get great work from it. So it's.
Well, I signed up for it because I teach digital marketing, so I was like, I have to have a go because I have to obviously know if it's useful. And I'm not kidding. A lot of the time now, I also managed to get on Blue Sky as well. I just copy and paste a tweet and then post it literally every time that I can.
Yeah, like what's unique? I guess it's kind of supposed to take all the people who are on Twitter and want to be on something like Twitter but don't like Elon Musk or something and go to. That's the only reason I can think you'd go onto it.
Yeah, I suppose at the moment it feels a bit like Twitter in about 2009 when people actually had conversations and it was rather than just mudslinging. It sort of feels like that at the moment.
Yeah.
But I've already had a couple of like the crypto bros following me and stuff, so I'm like, oh.
There we go. Yeah, there's got to be some sort of like mathematical equation before it turns to just shit slinging, like, you know, like a number, like 48 days or something.
Anyway, well, it's been absolutely lovely talking to you. And
yeah, thank you for having me.
Good luck with everything.
Yeah, you too.
Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee, or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.